Well, first Holmes was born, then he got fat, bald, and tired. What's up, Holmes?
Hey everybody, how are you? It's me, Jonathan Holmes, the star of Sup Holmes. Sorry. It's just funny to think that I just named a show after me and consider myself a star in any way. I mean, come on. Look at my set. Look at me. Such a funny thing to do. And this week we have Miguel Sternberg on the show. Miguel, how are you?
Good.
Thank you for being on the show. We met at PAX East a few months ago.
Yeah.
I was dead tired. It was the third day. My voice was all scratchy, and I looked from beyond the grave. I was smelly and terrible. And you were still willing to talk to me for some time about they bleed pixels.
You got it right this time.
I got it right this time. I don't know why I always call it the wrong thing. And a bunch of stuff. And you gave me your business card, and now here you are on Sup Holmes. Isn't that
Excellent.
nice? Yeah, it's exciting. Miguel, how did you get started in game development?
Sort of a weird roundabout way. I was one of the original co-founders of Capybara Games here in Toronto.
Oh, really?
Way back when they were doing like really terrible cell phone games for like pre-smartphone phones.
Oh, around when was that? What year was that?
God. This would be like roughly 2003-ish. I could be
Okay.
off by a year one way or the other.
Whoa, so like almost 10 years ago. So you were just a kid then. You must have been just a teen.
No, I'm older than I look. I'm 35, so.
No way, really?
Yep.
I'm 35, and I look at least 20 years older than you. So congratulations.
It's something magical in the air in Toronto. Keeps us young.
I've heard that about Toronto. So you were with Capybara Games, one of the founders with Nathan, I presume? Was Nathan
Yeah,
still in
Nathan
it?
and Chris. And there was a whole bunch of us. Like there was 12 people at the start
Oh,
of
wow.
Cappy, and then people sort of went their different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I was freelancing doing pixel art, and then more recently I started Spooky Squid games.
Right. When did you start? That's the company you're the founder of and owner
Yeah.
of now. When did that company start?
It's been about 4 years roughly. It was late 2008, early 2009.
Oh, okay. And that's when Night of the Cephalopods came out? Is that
Yeah,
right?
so it's when that's sort of a good way to start it. There would be when Night of the Cephalopods came out.
And tell
So
us
we hadn't
about
incorporated yet, but we had the name and such.
Right. And the name is connected to the game. Tell us about Night of the Cephalopods. I've played it, but I don't know if everyone else in the chat has played it. So in your own words, explain the game to us.
Okay, it's a short experiment in narrative excess, I think is the sort of little tagline on it. Basically, it's a very short, like 6-minute experience where you sort of walk around. It sort of looks like an old school Zelda game. It's like top down, has sort of a Lovecraftian vibe. But the thing that's cool about it is that it narrates back to you what you're doing and what's happening to the character, sort of in a first-person narration. It's similar later on, the folks who made Bastion did a similar thing. It's not quite the same, but it's quite close.
I like Night of the Cephalopods better, and I'm not just saying that because you're on the show. Night of the Cephalopods has it seems more appropriate in that gameplay scenario because it's a sort of horror but with a self-knowing bent to it, almost like Cabin in the Woods. It's got a little bit of a Cabin in the Woods feel where it's willing to bring you in and take you out of the game simultaneously, and the narration takes you out but in a way that adds to the emotion, and then you jump back in when the narrator stops talking. So great job on that. Is that what you were going for? Night of the Cephalopods?
It was like a bunch of things. Thanks for that comparison, though. I love Cabin in the Woods, so I really like that comparison.
Oh, awesome.
It was actually came out of listening to one of Jonathan Blow's talks on sort of the problems of storytelling in games. And it seemed like one possible solution to the problem he was posing that we have with trying to narrate without pulling out of gameplay and doing cutscenes and such.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of like, would this work? And sort of like a little test. One thing that I think horror works well, and sort of the Lovecraft thing works well for doing that narration, is that you can deal with players who are being sort of unreliable players, because often when players are playing a game, they'll do stuff that doesn't actually fit the narrative flow of the game. So they'll do something where they'll, like, you know, just stand still for a while, or like fire blindly at things or like mess around with the game.
Sure.
And the Lovecraft sort of setting allows you to just go, oh, the character's just insane. He's losing his sanity. And so you can come up with a whole bunch of stuff. And that's actually sort of like, I think one of the successes and failures with Night of the Cephalopods is that when it handles players fucking around a lot better than it does actually players playing well. I did a lot of coverage for like weird ass shit that players might do, but very little for like playing well. Which I saw in sort of feedback from people also, like people who played it straight were like, there's hardly any narration in here, it's really repetitive. But people who fucked around had a lot more fun.
Huh, interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. I guess when I played the game well, I was just concentrating on doing a good job in the game, and when I played it poorly, I felt like you were rewarding me in a different way. So no matter what, I felt like I was getting something out of the game, be it being skillful at it or just getting a load of the narration. Because if you like just walk into one of the, for those who haven't played it, it's fun. There's this spooky sort of light blue Cthulhu heads coming at you at all times.
One of these dudes.
Oh yeah, look at that! Whoa, who made that? They knitted you a Squid. Who did?
A friend of mine. I've got friends who do crafts and such, so I've got a few different things that are like characters from my games on the desk.
That's awesome. I got a thing too. This guy made a shirt with my face on it, but as Sagat from Street Fighter. Isn't that weird? Yeah.
Whenever I see the eye patch, I think Big Boss.
Oh yeah, Big Boss too. Well, it doesn't actually say Sagat, so it could be anybody. But there's like 20 of these shirts in existence, and I'm proud to have one of them.
Awesome.
Anyway, yeah, I'm lucky, and you're lucky too. But you've worked really hard for what you've had. You've been in the business for, over 10 years then, or about 10 years?
Yeah, roughly 10 years.
Yeah.
And before that, doing like film and web design and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that. I was aware that you have curated a recent show in Toronto. Is that right?
Yeah, Comics versus Games, which
yes.
it's based on this show I saw several years ago that the Attract Mode guys, you know them?
I think so.
They're like in LA and New York.
Yeah, I don't know them personally, but I know their stuff.
Yeah, they do really awesome stuff involving sort of both like illustration and culture stuff with video games sort of mushed together in a way that I find really appealing. And so they did this show around GDC several years ago called Odex Games, where they got illustrators associated with the magazine Giant Robot and indie game developers together and had them make games together. And I really loved that show. I thought it was like an awesome idea. And I've always had a connection to the comics community here in Toronto. So the idea of sort of was to do the same thing, but with comic artists. So we got 5 comic artists and 5 game developers and said, make 5 games. And then one of them dropped out and I had to make one of the games. So I also ended up making one of the games for it as well.
Which one of the games did you make?
I made Black Church Brigandage, which is sort of a heavy metal basketball game, sort of like Smash Brothers plus basketball.
That's one of my favorite games in the thing. I mean, I only watched videos of it, but that's yeah, I should have recognized your pixel art actually because it's
actually not my pixel art. It's Andy Ellinger, the artist for Black Church, decided to try doing pixel art for it. So it's one of the few games where I didn't do the art.
Oh, you did a fine job. Yeah, it's I haven't played it, but I watched the video. It is the camera's pulled out. The characters are fairly small, so you feel like you have a lot of room to maneuver in. But you're playing basketball? Explain more about that. Tell us how that works.
It's sort of like he explained. It was sort of last minute because we had a game developer drop out, and I was like, okay, you've already done the art. I've got to make something cool for this. Let's meet up for beers. We'll talk about what your comic's about. I'll see the art you've done so far, and I'll come up with an idea that'll combine all those things and be awesome, or as awesome as I can make it in a week or two. So we met up, and he sort of explained the plot had this to do this sort of like an Antichrist baby and the parents, and then the sort of church trying to destroy the baby. And I was like, this would make a great sports game.
Of course it would. Yeah, it would, sure.
The ball is actually a baby that you pick up, and you're either the church trying to get it over to one side of the field and like throw it into a lake of fire, or you're the parents trying to sort of throw it into a sort of Viking boat to save it. And you can attack each other. There's exploding barrels. There's like 4 or 5 different types of power-ups. And it's 2 versus 2 in the best way. You can play it 1 versus 1, but it's best 2 versus 2, so you get sort of a passing game, throwing the baby back and forth and having barrels explode and shoot it off in different directions. It's chaotic and fun.
I'm not, you may have noticed I was silent during most of that talk. And it wasn't because I wasn't interested. It was because
Beware sports talk.
It's more that
What the hell was that?
that was Sinistar. He sometimes chimes in and helps us out a little bit. Sinistar from the world famous arcade game Sinistar. So you can either be the church or the parents of the Antichrist, and you use a baby. Either way, you're willing to use a baby as a basketball.
Yes.
That might be the best game. I've heard a lot of great game concepts on Sup Holmes so far. The show has been a roaring success. I've been very lucky to have such talented game developers on the show. So we had Rami Ismail on last week from Vlambeer. He talked about his Venusian first-person shooter. That's a hip-hop game that all the rap is in Venusian. And I thought that couldn't be topped. Yet here you are telling me about your baby basketball church versus parents video game, and you may be the new king of game ideas. That's really a thing? How can I play that? Now that we've talked about it, you need to let me know how I can play it. Is there any way I can
out what to do with it? It's probably going to be going on tour with Andy. He's going to a bunch of international comic shows over the next year, so he's going to be taking it with him to have playable at those events. I'm probably going to tune it a little bit over that time, and then eventually we'll figure out a way to release it to the public.
But as of right now, people can play it, or they could have played it at the show at the Comics versus Games.
Yeah, Comics versus Games, or at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival, where we also had it shown.
That's pretty awesome. And how'd the game go over?
Really well. It was great to see, like, at the comic show, we saw a lot of kids playing it versus at the art show, got to see a bunch of talented comic artists throwing down. It was pretty good.
Sounds incredible. Would you want to try to bring that game or any of those games from Comics versus Games maybe as a compilation to home consoles or portable consoles?
In the case of this, each team owns their games, so it's up to them what they decide to do with them.
Sure.
I'd like to find a way to make Black Church and maybe some of the other local multiplayer games I have available, because I really like local multiplayer stuff. Still sort of a puzzle how to put those out and make money from them. Just because so many people are into online multiplayer right now. But it's something I'm really interested in, figuring out how to do that.
Yeah. I'd imagine the portable space would be on the Vita or the 3DS or the iPhone would be kind of the best way to do local multiplayer, especially with iPhone, because so many people have them. But the controls wouldn't necessarily translate.
Yeah. But to me, like, the best way to play those games is like big screen TV and a bunch of controllers. Like, I love playing games that way.
Yeah. I wonder, maybe that's what the Wii U market is definitely going after, local multiplayer, from what I know. But that's a whole other kettle of fish. You have to tackle. You don't have a Wii U dev kit yet, do you?
No, sadly, we do not.
Yeah, most human beings don't. I wouldn't feel too badly about that. Some of the greatest game developers I know haven't gotten theirs yet. Like Suda51, who is going to be working on No More Heroes 3 for the Wii U, hasn't gotten his yet, which makes me sad.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
We don't have much.
At least that's last I heard. I haven't talked to Suda51 in a little bit. Speaking of local multiplayer versus co-op, why do you think multiplayer is so popular online these days, whereas people are less apt to go local overall?
I don't know. Like, I think game developers play games in a different way. So, like, to me, like, when I hardly ever have time to see my friends or to play games. So when I can, I want to do both. So I invite a bunch of friends over. We play a bunch of local multiplayer games. But it seems like, from what I see sort of online and such, and when I talk to journalist friends and such that really most people prefer to play online. I don't know if it's because I live in a major city with good transportation, so like it's pretty easy to hook up with my friends, whereas if I lived in the suburbs, maybe it would be different. I don't know. Like, to me, it's the opposite of what I want to do is playing online. But I know I'm in the minority.
Sure. Well, no, I agree with you, and I tend to think that we maybe the vocal or not vocal. The what's the opposite of vocal?
Silent.
Quiet.
Quiet.
Silent majority, because people online are going to say they like to play games online.
Yeah.
And that's where they're vocal. Whereas people who don't go online all that much, who don't play games online, you'll never hear their voice on the internet. And certainly, New Super Mario Brothers Wii, I think that sold like 26 million copies or something, and that's local multiplayer, as is Donkey Kong Country Returns and a bunch of Wii games. But the people who play those games don't talk a lot on the internet. To me, local multiplayer is like talking on the phone, whereas online multiplayer is like texting. People like texting too, even though it's way more work and the level of communication is way more constricted. But if you're shy about actually seeing a human being, I guess it's a little easier for you.
Maybe there's just a lot of antisocial people. I don't know.
Really?
But I love getting a bunch of friends together and playing local. The thing I think, though, is that like right now, the games that have been successful local have to have like a single player component that works. And I find some of the most interesting design choices you can make are games that require 2 or more people. There was a game actually by one of the Comics versus Games game developers. Jamie Fristrom made a game called Schizoid. It was one of the first XBLA games, and it requires co-op play. Like, you have to play it with another person locally for it to work.
What's that game about? Schizoid.
It's sort of like it's like a 360 shooter where you can't shoot, and each of you is sort of color coded, and enemies of one color will chase the other color, and so you have to sort of like go and block. It's almost got like an Ikaruga thing where like blue can defeat blue enemies and orange can defeat orange enemies, and so you sort of like herd enemies around and then try to like bump into the ones that are the same color as you while avoiding the ones that are the opposite color.
That game sounds awesome. I can just buy that right now?
Yeah, no, it's been out for ages.
Why didn't
I played it at PAX 10 like years ago and really, really liked it. But apparently it didn't do terribly well because it requires 2 people in the same room. But to me, that's like one of the most interesting game experiences you can have, is that thing where it requires you to work together. Like, I think Left 4 Dead showed that can work really well. Designed built around having to work together rather than just sort of like, okay, you can both do well and then you'll do well at the game, but you don't have to really think about each other.
Have you ever played You, Me, and the Cubes?
I haven't. What is that?
I wonder what you'll think of that. That's a game. I'm blanking on the developer's name, but there's this Japanese developer who was considered kind of an up-and-coming auteur of Japanese game development, and then had like a divorce and a fall from grace and like stopped making games. He made D, I think it was on the Saturn. It's kind of a horror game.
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's pretty much forgotten now, but there was a time when everyone was talking about it, probably 15 years ago. Anywho, he came back with this game called You, Me, and the Cubes, a WiiWare game with terrible art direction. The people just looked at it and were like, oh no, it's one of those WiiWare games that everyone hates, I'm not playing it. But if you actually take a chance on it and buy it, it's a really interesting experiment when it comes to co-op. And it's all a metaphor for like having sex and having children, but a really, really abstract version of that. You have to grab the Wii remote and shake it and then throw it. It's really a pretty literal sexual metaphor. And when you throw it, children come out. And you have to throw the children on these floating cubes and balance them on the cube, right? So they don't fall off, so they don't tilt the cube and fall to their deaths. So it's like having sex and then parenting, and just being like the worst parent. And when you play a co-op, you both have to shake it at the same time and throw it together, or else you don't do as solid of a toss. And then when you're done playing the game, it rates your compatibility with like little hearts and stuff. Man, I really didn't expect to talk about You, Me, and the Cube so much today. Thanks, Miguel. Hope you can
You're welcome.
put up with me. I'm a little chatty sometimes. Oh, there's stuff coming in. Phyto. Oh, Sinistar told me via the chat that me and the Cube's developer's named Phyto, so we can look him up later. Yeah, that'll be fun.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, you might like it. I hope so. So you're in Toronto, and
Yeah.
Toronto is not in the United States. It's not one of the cities people talk about a lot. People talk LA, people talk New York. But from what I'm gathering, Toronto has got a huge blossoming game development scene. Would you say that's right?
For indie games, like completely. It's kind of insane the amount of stuff that's either come from here or is being made here. Like there's Capybara, but there's also MetaNet who made N Plus are here. Dyad is being made here. It's a game called Home that's sort of like a pixel art horror game by Benjamin Rivers. It's coming out soon.
That's right.
Our own games. Christine Love made a game called Analog a Hate Story.
I didn't know Christine Love was up in Toronto. I follow her on Twitter. She's a hoot.
Yeah. No, she's here in Toronto. There's like I'm forgetting people. Queasy Games making Sound Shapes.
Oh, that's right. And Capybara, or at least Super Brothers is working with Sound Shapes now.
And there's a bunch of stuff I've seen that hasn't been announced yet also, like from people who are just up and coming, that is amazing. So it's only going to get more so, I think, the amount of like cool games coming out of Toronto.
Why do you think that is? What is it about Toronto that's kind of fostering artists who are gravitating towards games instead of all the different other forms of art they could be making?
I think it's partially that we had a period where there were like literally no jobs for anyone who wanted to make games. But we have a lot of animation schools, and we've got a lot of computer science schools. So there's a ton of people coming out who should be making games. And like Cappy started from basically a bunch of us going like, "There's no jobs here. We all want to make games. What are we going to do? I guess start making our own." And so pretty much people had to go the indie route, even though it hadn't really been named indie games yet. At that point. And then once you had a few people doing that, it starts to gather steam. And so like now we have Ubisoft just down the street from me, but it's at the point where we're big enough as an indie game scene that it's still sort of, there's more people coming in and making games, and it's seen as sort of like a valid pathway to take if you want to make games here.
So you guys are successful enough you don't have to sell out to the man. Really?
Pretty much.
That's awesome. That's such a relief. Nothing against Ubisoft. They make some great games too, but I would much rather game developers get to maintain their own voice than have to subject themselves to what publishers would tell them to do. And you guys are getting to do that. That's awesome. Do you all like each other, or is it like a fiercely competitive, mean-spirited, stabbing in the back, over-dramatic reality show style madhouse?
No, generally, like, people in indie games in general are, like, really supportive. Like, we all want to see games mature and become more interesting as an art form. And, like, it's hard to see people as competition when they're doing personal work. Like, Dyad and They Bleed Pixels, like, we know each other, we're friends, we help each other out, and, like, they're totally different games. No one's going to go like, oh, I'm not going to play Dyad because I played They Bleed Pixels, because they're both indie games. They're completely different experiences. So I think the fact that we're making personal work means that we view each other as not competition, but as part of sort of an ecology that we want to grow.
I think it's because you're just not a bunch of jerks. I know jerks. I know them well, and they're quick to just be threatened by other people who they think maybe are more talented or just doing a better job than them. And you and Sean, now remember that, you and Sean McGrath, creator of Dyad, were fairly close to each other at the PAX East.
Yeah, we were right next to each other.
That's awesome.
He actually invited me up. He was basically like, we've got some extra space. Do you want to go join me and the Osmonauts guys? And I was like, really busy. Hell yes. Yes, we'll be there. We'll drive down.
That's awesome. Yeah, Sean's a great guy. He's got a lovely beard and a great sense of game design.
Lovely beard and an amazing cowboy hat. I don't know if he was wearing that, but like, that's how I identify him in crowds. I just sort of stand for the big beard and the cowboy hat.
Yeah, it is quite telling. You don't see a lot of that these days. I got to get him on this show pretty soon as Dyad comes out. So speaking of They Bleed Pixels, we should tell the people about that. That's one of the two big projects you're working on right now. Is that right?
Yeah, we've got one that's sort of on hold that we were working on beforehand that we sort of prototyped and we want to make, which is Guerrilla Gardening, which is a militant stealth gardening game. It's
Tell us about that first. You can't just tease like that. What is your militant stealth gardening game all about?
It's based on a street art movement, like an actual thing that people do called guerrilla gardening, which is basically graffiti with plants, like finding abandoned places, sneaking in the middle of the night, and planting beautiful gardens.
What? When does that happen? Where's my guerrilla gardening? All I get is the dog poop and then McDonald's garbage on my street. No one's coming in. Does that happen in your neighborhood? Do people just come in and plant petunias when you're not looking?
No, actually, I've done some guerrilla gardening with a local group as sort of research. And there's a street artist who actually combines guerrilla gardening with video game stuff. He's done a bunch of flower boxes with the question mark, the Mario question mark, and like red flowers, and put them up in different parts of the city.
You're so much more interesting than me. You know a guy that plants flowers in a Mario question mark box in strangers' houses or outside of their houses?
I don't know him personally. He goes by the name Poster Child. He's done a bunch of like really cool video game street art. He did like some really cool Portal stuff also in the city. But yeah, so it's based on this street art movement. And I was sort of like, that sounds like an awesome opportunity for a stealth game. So the game sort of like, it combines my love of Thief and Metal Gear Solid with street art and planting. There's a bit of sort of Jet Grind Radio in there. And so it takes place in a dystopian city where a sort of evil dictator, General Bauhaus, has banned all plants from the city. And everyone's really depressed. So you see people sort of wandering around looking sad. And you've got to cheer them up by like distracting the cops and planting stuff over government propaganda. And then, like, if they see the flowers, they'll cheer up. And there's sort of very sort of crazy flowers you can use to solve puzzles. It's something special, and I really want to get back to it. But like, we sort of, after doing the prototype, budgeted it and went, we have nowhere near enough money to make this yet. So we're going to put it to the side, work on some smaller games, and then come back to it.
Right. So you're building funds to. Well, that game sounds freaking incredible. I hope that you get rich soon so you can finish making it. What consoles would you want to put that on? Would that be mainly PC or?
I think at this point, like, we'd start anything on PC now because that makes it the easiest to port to other things. We kind of learned our lesson a little bit with They Bleed Pixels, where we started out aiming it towards XBlig and the Xbox 2 years ago, and then sort of the Xbox or XBlig marketplace has just gone completely down.
Well, it is. That's really strange to me. The Xbox Live indie games and WiiWare and PlayStation Minis, from what I can tell, people are having a hard time making money on all of those platforms at this point. I'm wondering if, why do you think that is?
It's a curation thing. Like, and it's tricky. Like, if you're the platform holder, you can't make those sort of lower tier indie categories too good, because if they are, then they're going to compete with your money makers, where you're, you know, dealing with large publishers. So I think it's a problem that they're still trying to solve. Like, I think everyone wants them to be successful, but figuring out how. I think Microsoft's done a particularly poor job with XBlig, because there's some great games on that channel, but we sort of learned from that we should really just aim at like PC and like a C build that we can very easily switch to other platforms, whereas we're sort of stuck in a Microsoft proprietary one with XNA, so it's going to be a little bit longer till we hit some of the other platforms we'd like to for They Bleed Pixels. Right.
Does They Bleed Pixels have a publisher as of yet, or is it you?
It's going to be self-published, but it's going to be on a major PC distribution platform that we have not yet announced, but that pretty much announces it.
Yeah, it's you're going to put it on WordPress. You're going to put it on that one guy's WordPress website.
Yeah, we're going to put it on a really obscure thing. We're going to use one of the URL shorteners, and only if you know that URL will you be able to get the game. That's our distribution plan now.
Or it's going to maybe go on Steam, which would be awesome too. Whatever you think will work better.
Yeah, possibly.
One of the first choice you make. It is still coming to Xbox Live indie games?
Not at first. We're going to sort of see where things go over the next year. Start with PC now and go from there.
That makes
See
sense.
what our options are.
Yeah,
But we
I
sort
would
of
hope.
had to sort of a
I'm
stop.
sorry.
We had to sort of do a stop, look at where our situation is, and like replan things. Because like the problem with all game development is you start it like 2 or more years before it actually is going to come out. And so you sort of go like, what's the marketplace look now? And then you find out 2 years later what it actually is going to be. And like, was I good at predicting the future? Yes, no.
That's a bastard. I'm sorry you have to do that. It would be so much better if you could just worry about, making a good video game and not have to guess this world of marketplaces. I really wish that there were more marketplaces. One of the things I'm sad about is that Microsoft has the only store on Xbox, and Sony has the only store on PlayStation, and Nintendo has the only store on Wii and 3DS. Because of that, it's kind of like if there was only one store in the entire United States, and if they decide not to sell a product, then that product essentially can no longer exist. I think it's just way too much power for storekeepers to have in general. But maybe there's more to it. I don't know. What do you think? Am I being out of line? Am I being too judgmental?
I think there's definitely a concern, well, with like I think the internet in general of sort of the privatization of like public spaces and marketplaces and such. That we get these weird situations where suddenly 1 or 2 companies really control things to a large degree, and I think that's always worrisome. Like especially as an artist, it's like you want to be able to make whatever you want to make and put it out there without having to worry about like, will so and so like it and put it on this marketplace? Will they go, oh no, sorry, we don't do that type of content. We're not gonna distribute this. It's definitely.
Or they can take a huge cut from it. I've heard Xbox, people are actually renting publishing space on Xbox Live Arcade. An Xbox Live Arcade publisher will be like, well, we'll publish your game for like 6 weeks and charge you so much money to even let it exist on the store, and then after that, we'll get rid of it. It's such a
yeah.
Business in general freaks me out.
There's a lot of weirdness, but it's like you deal with what you have and you try to make, concentrate on making good games.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's bringing a lot of people to Steam when they look at what they have and pick their options. Steam seems to be the number one choice. We have questions coming in. Thank you for asking questions, people in the chat. I appreciate it. Pio Canonologue says, in what ways do you think games and comics influence each other negatively or positively? That's a great one. And you're involved in the indie comics scene a little bit in Toronto. You did the pixel art on the back of the 4th Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah. No, the one that looks like this.
Yeah. Show us the back. Show us the good part.
It's the back.
Yeah, it looks great. I love that so much. That got me, that and the other pixel art on the other volumes got me to actually buy those comics. Brian Lee O'Malley's good too, I guess, but the pixel art's really what sold me on those. So do you see a direct influence between comics and games, both in your own life and in the games and comics creators that you know personally?
I think there's definitely there's one thing I found from talking to people and sort of seeing who is interested in taking part in comics versus games is it's definitely there's a lot of comic creators who always wanted to make a game. And I used to do mini comics. I used to sort of be more involved in sort of the indie comic scene, and I sort of just realized I drew too slowly and I could make games faster than I could make comics.
Sure.
So I sort of went the other way. So I think there's something about them culturally that's similar, and I feel like as someone who sort of grew up with indie comics very much, I'm not a superhero fan. I'm very much a fan of the stuff like what Mal does with Scott Pilgrim, and that's what I grew up on. I feel like indie games, when I saw the indie game movement start to happen, it felt very familiar to me because it feels to me very much like what happened in comics, and they're sort of ahead of games. They've gotten to the point where they're a little bit more respected, but still, a little bit in the cultural gutter where it's fun and interesting.
Yeah. Oh, what a good way of putting it.
So I feel like there's definitely games are kind of following in comics footsteps in terms of finding out how to tell more personal sort of not really stories necessarily, but make more personal work,
Mm-hmm.
whether that be like weird and immature and ridiculous, or something that's really thought-provoking and emotional. Like that sort of range happened with comics, and now it's starting to happen with games. So I do see a definite sort of like parallel between the two. Just that games are a little bit behind.
Yeah, yeah. And they haven't been around for as long, which I'm sure is part of it. But we're getting to a generation with both where people grew up with comics not as something necessarily for kids, but they saw it as a legitimate art form. That actually happened a little bit farther back, and we're getting into a generation where 20 people in their 20s and 30s grew up with video games as just a normal part of life, and they don't see it as something that's necessarily just for fantasy or for sci-fi or power fantasies in general. And they are getting to that point where there's personal work. I think that games are still waiting for their equivalent to Mouse, Art Spiegelman's Mouse.
Yeah.
Just, isn't necessarily makes tons of money, but proves to whoever it is out there who decides what's high art and low art that video games can pack that kind of a punch and have that kind of legitimacy. I mean, I think we already know that, so it would be kind of redundant for us to see that, but the world at large doesn't quite see it yet, and it'll be nice.
It's the same with Mouse. So it's like legitimate stuff being done before it that was really interesting. It was very artistic, but it was the one that sort of broke out and got noticed outside of the comics community. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's going to be as easy for games to do that, because literacy in games, being able to play them and experience them properly, takes, I think, more skill than any other art form. Like you can watch a movie, your first movie, and you'll understand what's happening with the camera cuts and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But like you hand a controller to someone who hasn't played a game, and that ability to just have the movement on the screen and the movement in their head match up without any sort of thought in between isn't there. And I think that's part of the problem that games have had gaining legitimacy is seeing some of the stuff that, like, part of what can make a game like an artistic experience or like a creative, it's that whole game art thing, whatever. Anyways, part of what like is an aesthetic in games is how it feels to move around. Like in They Bleed Pixels, that was what I was really concerned with, is the sort of kinesthetic experience interesting? Does it feel good to move in it? Mm-hmm. And that's like a legitimate artistic choice that you're making in a game, how it feels. And until we have a vocabulary that recognizes that, and people who can play it and are literate in that, who are sort of culture makers or whatever, that's not going to be recognized. So something that's completely invisible to someone just watching a game, but is really like at the heart of a lot of action games.
Whoa. What? I understood what you were saying, but it was amazing because I wrote about that like last week. I wrote this long thing about how people can't see video games as an art form because the barrier between them and experiencing the content of a game is so thick, and the thickness is made up of the distance between what's going on here and what's going on screen. They can't get there because they suck at this stuff. And your game, They Bleed Pixels, I'm glad you re-brought it up. One of the things I loved about your game, and I'll recap it real quick so people don't know, it's kind of a platformer action game, beat 'em up, I guess you could say, but extremely streamlined. I don't want to say simplified because there's a lot of detail to it, but it's jump and attack, and yet there's a detailed combo system with a lot of juggles and using environmental hazards to, like, you bounce an enemy off a wall, he hits the spikes, bounce back, you do a jumping uppercut, knock him in the air, then hit him back down, then start. And the more of a combo you do, the more you build up a meter that will give you an opportunity later to form a checkpoint. So it's all tied to the gameplay. The entire experience is really tied to this idea of building up huge combos. So it's a simple idea that expands in a lot of different directions simultaneously. Fantastic work on your freaking game. Can't wait to play it. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I played it at PAX, but I want to play it again. I had a point in there somewhere. I think it's going to be a game like yours, or perhaps a game by like that game company, which all their games are very easy to just jump into. that's eventually going to show people who don't think they like video games that the medium has a lot more to it than they can see off the bat.
Well, so much about Journey was game feel. I feel like the way it felt to move around was so much part of the aesthetic of it. And actually, there's a book by Steve Swink called Game Feel, which is basically entirely about that aspect of games. I thought it was really good that he sort of dissected just that bit, because I think it's something that's remained kind of invisible and people haven't really talked about enough.
Who the heck is Steve Swank? What an awesome name that is. He writes books about video games? I love this guy already.
He's doing the Shadow Physics game that's coming out at some point, which it's like cast shadows. You're platforming on cast shadows of objects.
That sounds awesome.
It is.
Who is this Steve Swank? What else has he done? Has he made other video games? He must have.
He has. I'm blanking right now, unfortunately.
That's okay. It's not your job to know about video games. It's mine. Thank you. Thank you for telling me about so much stuff I didn't know. Oh, we should get to another question. I feel bad. Sorry, questioners. He just got on a roll. Rinse, wash, repeat asks, what's up with that name, Spooky Squid? Is there a story, or was it just the first URL that wasn't taken?
A little bit of both. I had a bunch of Squid names, and I basically searched to see which ones had URLs taken, and that was one where there was no asshole like sitting on it going like, yeah, pay me $1,000 to use this URL. So it was the one that won out.
I think it's a great name. Does it have a symbolic meaning that you don't want to tell us about?
No, really, it was just sort of like I knew we're probably going to do some stuff sort of with a Lovecrafty vibe, which several of our games have, and I knew I could come up with a nice logo, which I ended up using. Like my interim logo has become a permanent logo in the end. I had this whole idea of like a squid sort of wearing a sheet, like a ghost, being spooky, but we never ended up going with it. We just have these like simple tentacles.
Yeah, that sounds great. I like the design you have now. Maybe that could be an enemy in an upcoming game. That would be fun. Here's what I think Spooky Squid means. I think it means you're like a ghost. So you're like here, but you're not really here. You have a presence without having a lot of physical intensity. Because the indie games are like that. They're kind of like, the whole indie scene isn't as like solid as publishers who have all this money and throw all these cheese parties. Yeah. You guys are kind of like in and out like ghosts, and you've got tentacles. So you're doing multiple things at one time. Like I've got 2 arms, so look, I can drink coffee and type at the same time. But you're curating game shows and making 2 different games at once, and going to trade shows and doing back covers for comic books. You really are like a spooky squid.
Exhausted is what I am.
Freaky ass.
Really, really tired.
I bet you are. Do you think indie game development, this is from Sounds Like, do you think indie game development will see a similar growth in accessible tools for lay people, such as found electronic music production, e.g. Fruity Loops? Well, Game Maker's already out there, but yeah.
I think already, like, both Game Maker and Unity seem to be really accessible. I use Game Maker a lot, and like I did a game for Spam Jam, which is part of the Pirate Cart that came out a while ago. That game I made in 2 days using Game Maker, and like my background is a little bit programmy, but I'm mainly an artist. So I think it's already happening. Like there are really good tools out there now for people learning game making, and they're only going to get better. Like as I've said to some friends, we're in right now the worst situation will ever be in game making. Like it's only going to get easier.
Right.
Like the tools now are as bad as we're going to experience. It's never going to get worse than this. It's only going to get better.
Right. And it's already a lot better than it used to be.
Oh, yeah. Like, when I was a teenager trying to find stuff to make games with, it was terrible. Like, there were a lot of tools that were buggy, and then there was, like, Visual Basic. Or, like, straight up C, which is not easy for lay people to use, necessarily.
No, it's all just math and, like, broken English. It's a bastard C. I tried programming in that. It was a nightmare. Bob the Cat Lol asks, how long does it take to make good pixel art? Also, what is the general process from paper to screen? Oh, what a good question, Bob. Yes.
It really depends on, like, it actually depends on how many pixels you're dealing with. Like, as soon as you make an image bigger, you're going to have to fill all of those in with detail. So the size really matters. for how long it takes. Something like the Scott Pilgrim cover, which is really detailed, that was a good chunk of a week working on that. And I'll usually like do very rough sketches on a piece of paper just to get an idea of how I want to frame things. If I'm doing like an illustration piece, if I'm doing individual game assets, that's different. So I'll do a rough sketch, get an idea of what I want. Then I'll work in Photoshop, just really zoomed in and rough it out. And so slowly refine it. I'll sort of block the major pieces of color. And then if I'm animating, I bring it into a tool called graphic scale, which is specifically for pixel art. And I do all my animating in that. So time, it's hard to say because it really depends on the piece, but it's always pretty much the same process of start with pencil sketch, then rough it in Photoshop with big splotches of color, and then just slowly refine until it's good.
I was secretly taking notes that whole time because I do pixel art sometimes as well. I never heard of graphic scale. Oh, I'm so stupid. I did all my 2D animation just frame by frame in Photoshop, and it was very...
Yeah, that's a painful way. I used to do it that way, then I found graphic scale.
Yeah, I'm going to get that.
Yeah, graphic scale is really, really good for animating in. It's been a lifesaver when it comes to the animating side of things.
I bet. I'll get it today. Thanks for that. Thanks for the education. You ever think about teaching classes on game development and that sort of thing?
I'm actually thinking of doing that. Once They Bleed Pixels is done, I might try doing some local classes in pixel art, because I know that there's been people who've been interested. And I do a certain amount of mentoring also. I work with Dames Making Games, which Zoe Quinn, I think you're interviewing in a few weeks.
She's wonderful. Yeah, she'll be on. We're taking a break, so everyone knows. We're taking a break before E3. So next week there won't be a show, but after that, we'll have Zoe Quinzel on. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did mentoring for that. So I help people with their pixel art and also with their game maker skills when they sort of do these little 1 month lesson workshops. And I've done some previous ones.
That's awesome. Is there are there like pixel art artists or games that are examples of pixel art that you use in order to teach people, or even if there weren't, are there particular games you think have better pixel art than others that you see as inspiration?
The two that I sort of look at from sort of like the history of pixel art games are Seiken Densetsu 3, which is one of the sequels to Secrets of Mana. Has absolutely amazing Super Nintendo art. And then Metal Slug 3, which is sort of the best of the Metal Slugs for their pixel art, is outstanding.
I always tell people Metal Slug 3 is the best looking game ever made, and they tell me I'm crazy. You think so too?
You're not crazy. It's
that's so
amazing pixel art.
I feel like such a not dumb person for a change. Take that, Hamza Aziz. Hamza Aziz is our communications director, and he thinks I'm crazy for the Metal Slug 3. Isn't it? How did they do that? How did they freaking do Metal Slug 3 with the zombies and the slugs and the yetis and all of that?
The backgrounds are what get me with that, because they're huge paintings. Like that takes serious time to do backgrounds like that, because it's non-tiling. Like you can tell after 3 they had some other company doing it, and they start tiling the backgrounds and they cheap out a bunch. But 3 have these huge matte paintings. Yeah. I cannot understand how long they must have taken to draw those.
They must be so fast at that point. I'm assuming that the more you do it, the faster you get, and the better you get at going quickly in general. So they must have just been freaking masters. I wonder what they're doing now. That was so sad when it was right after Metal Slug 3 that SNK went bankrupt, and then they formed SNK Playmore, which brought us Metal Slug 4, 5, 6, and 7, which... I don't hate them, but they're such a letdown after 3.
Yeah. No, 3 is definitely the high point of the series in terms of the pixel art. It's just freaking insane when I look at it. I don't know how they did that.
Let's just play that game and drool and make funny sounds while we play it, because you're the only other person I know who appreciates it that much. I feel like a weird kindred spiritness with you. Thank you, Miguel. We got another question from Payo Kanala Nog. You never say their name right. How difficult is it to balance between the roles of artist, programmer, and designer? That must be hard.
It depends. With Vaguely Pixels, I'm working with my partner, Andrew Pilkew, who's an amazing programmer. So I can do much more complex stuff than when I'm working solo on one of the Game Maker games we've put out. I don't know about balancing those roles. I always feel like I'm on holiday when I get to program because I'm like, pixel art is work for me. Like that's like my regular work day.
Sure.
And has been for almost a decade. So whenever I get to program, I'm like, oh man, this is so fun. This is so not like work. Which is totally bizarre and sounds like it should be backwards.
Yeah.
But when I'm working with Andrew, he just trusts me a lot, which kind of blows my mind. So like I'm doing the game design, I'm doing the level design, and I'm doing the art, and I'm often like, no, we can't do it this way. This is like wrong for this reason I can't really explain. And he just trusts me. And then if it's a really bad idea, he'll be like, no, here's why you shouldn't do that. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm an idiot.
Awesome. So you guys, how long have you been working together? Is that since 2008 with the Cephalopods?
Yeah. Basically, we had a grant to do the prototype for Guerrilla Gardening, and that's when I brought him on. And I sort of knew we worked well together because we'd both been contractors working on a kid's game for another company. And so I knew I worked well with him, and I was like, hey, you want to work on this crazy idea I have involving stealth and gardening? And he was like, sure, yeah.
It's stuck ever since. That's great. It's interesting to me how many game developers, smaller indie game developers, seem to pair off into groups of 2 or 3 tops. Flambeer is 2 guys, Gaijin Games is 3 guys. So they've expanded now, but the core is actually just Mike and Alex at this point. Mike Roush and Alex Noisy, and then Team Meat, 2 guys there. What do you think it is about that pairing, that marriage that tends to happen with the indie game developers? Do you think there's a reason why it tends to go in that direction?
I think it's one is that it's unusual to get the full skill set you need to make a lot of games. Like there's games you can make that use just math dyad or everyday shooter are beautiful, but they're very abstract.
Right.
And they're the example of just a coder with an aesthetic sense, but without the ability to say do like characters and such.
Sure.
So it's one thing I think it's the ability that you get when you've got a programmer and an artist that you sort of get the best of both worlds. I think it's also it's just a lot of work doing indie games. So having 2 people just makes it a lot easier than if you're just a single person who's having to do all of your like marketing, all of the talks like this, and do art, game design, level design, programming. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a ton. That's why I'm surprised when game developers such as yourself, you have a lot of friends and you have a community, and I bet you share a lot of ideas with other game developers in that way. But in terms of actually forming a big company together, I rarely see that. I've asked Brian Provinciano, developer of Retro City Rampage, great game, a while back, why he's just going it alone, and he wasn't really sure. He said he thinks about forming a huge company with all his friends, but it's in a lot of ways easier said than done. Have you ever thought about getting all your game developer friends together to make like a conglomeration, an army of game developers, or do you like it more just you and your partner?
I think that with that size, your ability to make works where you don't have to compromise goes down. Like the more people you have, the more you need to sort of meet everyone's particular likes and dislikes, and the less unique the games become. So I think that's part of it. It's also just a lot of work when you've got a lot of people. There's got to be a producer then. As soon as you've got like 5, 6 people or like 30 people, you need to have someone whose job is just to produce, to keep things organized. It becomes more and more like a business, like a traditional business, and less sort of a unique creative expression at that point.
That makes a lot of sense.
And I had another idea about why, and it just suddenly completely blanked.
That's okay. I'll make sounds while you think. Wow,
that makes it so much easier to think. That's amazing.
Yeah, I know.
Can I hire you to do that in the background while I work on my game? Because I think like so many ideas, I can't express them all.
Wow, that was fast. I was only doing it for a couple of seconds. Think what you'd make up in an hour of that. If I was just
Yeah, no, my brain is just flooded with ideas now. That is so useful.
What a great sense of sarcasm you have.
I
Wow. Pio Analog is asking so many good questions this week. This is great. Thank you. Would you consider a Kickstarter for guerrilla gardening? I was going to ask that, but I bit my tongue. What do you think?
It's hard to know if we could make enough to do it. It's like basically it's isometric pixel art in high res, which is insanely slow to make. So I don't know if we could make enough with Kickstarter being relatively unknown. It's like we're not Double Fine. We're not going to make, you know, $1 million or even $500,000. So it may be at some point we might try doing a Kickstarter for it, for maybe for some of the funding, maybe go to a government grant for some of it, which we can do in Canada, at least for the next little while until they get rid of them. And hopefully They Bleed Pixels will do well enough that we'll be a bit more independent and be able to take on bigger, more ambitious, weirder projects.
Yeah, yeah. That is pretty amazing that Canada gives those grants out. I forgot about that. Because they consider video games to be like a piece of art, like an art form that's expressing some ideas and adding to the culture of the country. So they pay you guys to do it. Is that right?
It's to some extent that. It's actually the for us here in Ontario, the sort of division of the government that handles that is actually the same one that handles like books and television, and they're not the same as the grant boards for pure art, capital A art. I'm hoping that those will start to, because I think that there's a place for games that won't necessarily make money but are interesting ideas. But that hasn't really started to happen yet, where the sort of the non-business part of the cultural establishment recognizes Canadian games.
Sure.
So it's sort of, they see it the same way that they see sort of Hollywood movies right now. So somewhat artistic, but still a business.
Right. That's exactly why I would care about video games getting their equivalent to Art Spiegelman's Mouse. It's not because I really care about the art form being legitimized. It's just practically speaking, once you have your equivalent to Mouse, you can then say to the government, look, I'm making art, give me some money. And comics artists can do that now. I don't know if that was really happening before Mouse won the Pulitzer, but now that it has won it, I know comics artists who, you know, they'll ask for a grant and they'll say, oh yeah, and I'll frame it and I'll put it in a gallery so you can call it art. And then the local city will give them some money to try to make that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
A transition happening, like both with comics and with games. Like They Bleed Pixels was actually shown at the Winnipeg Art Gallery for Nuit Blanche, thanks to a chiptune artist / curator here in Toronto called Mr. Ghosty. Who
really?
does chiptune stuff. But he curated a bunch of stuff in Winnipeg when he was there, and one of them was a show at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. And so even something like They Bleed Pixels, it's crazy and bloody, can end up in an art gallery.
But it certainly has a beautiful aesthetic to it, and makes you feel a variety of different things. I didn't just think blood when I was looking at it. I was thinking, you know, float. I was thinking about the spatial relationships. I was thinking about fun versus death. I thought about a lot of things while I was playing the game. Is Canada just better? You're talking about all these Canadian things that are just way better than everything that happens in the United States. We have E3. Hooray, get to see Call of Duty again. You've got like video games and art galleries and stuff.
There's some cool stuff happening in the States too, like Indiecade. I don't know if you've been to that, but it's fantastic. Like it's one of the best events I've been to.
I've read about it for years. I've met the people at it, but I've never been able to go.
You should make it happen. Yeah. Seriously, it's amazing.
What is up with that? I guess it's not Canada that's better than the United States. It's just you that's better than me, Miguel. Jesus. I want to hear about your I'm reading the notes you sent me along earlier. That's why I keep looking down. And you were going to tell me about an idea for a Victorian-era epidemiological roguelike. What the heck does that mean?
Okay, so this is my idea that would never make money, but that I'd love to make.
Okay.
It's a epidemiological roguelike. So it's about figuring out the source of a disease and like how it's being transferred from person to person, which is what epidemiology is.
Okay.
I want to make a game basically inspired by this book called The Ghost Map, which is about how a cholera epidemic was discovered and sort of tracked down in Victorian England. And I read this book and I was like, this would make an amazing game. So I want to make a game that sort of randomly generates a city and randomly generates a disease. And then you have to sort of figure out how that disease is being passed from person to person day by day as it spreads. So sort of like a roguelike, sort of like a history of science thing, maybe with a little bit of steampunk thrown in. You're making a lot of like very confused faces.
You're blowing my mind. I've been making those faces in my mind the whole time. I've just had my filter on, my face filter. But now I've given up because you've blown my mind too many times today with your using a baby as a basketball Antichrist game and with your guerrilla gardening game, and now with your roguelike about spreading diseases game. What a freaking brilliant idea for a game. That would do huge in college classes about epidemiology and just the nature of communicable processes in general. You could get tons of money off that. That game could make you rich, especially if you get volume in there or something.
I'd probably find a way to screw it up where it was like not interesting to the people who like do educational games, not interested in to hardcore gamers, and like the art people would be like, it's a game, it's not art. And I just end up broken a gutter, which would actually be kind of fitting with the whole Victorian England thing.
Yes, that would be fitting. Yeah, you'd be living the game at that point. But no, I have a lot of faith in that idea. I feel like if you could produce it for cheaply enough so you didn't put too much risk out there, that could go over really well.
Yeah, it's on my we've got like a big Google Doc where we just like throw ideas into for Spooky Squid, and sort of when we finish They Bleed Pixels, we'll sort of look at the bank balance, go like, is it time for guerrilla gardening, or do we go through the list? And then we'll go through the list of crazy ideas and go like, this is the game we're going to make next. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the ones on the list.
Awesome. So you just need to get rich first and finish your other two games. How many games are on that list, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't know.
More than two?
Many more than two. There's like basically like all game developers that I know have like a huge list. There's a huge list of the games they want to make. They know that they're only going to get a few of those made in their lifetime.
Sure.
But everyone has tons, which is why there's sort of like people are very precious about their game ideas often. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I have no interest in stealing your game idea because I have this document that I'm never going to get through, that is going to take like years and years to get through just what I have now. And
sure.
While I'm working on games, new ones are filtering into that document. So like,
yeah, I'd imagine that you the process of making a game will take you 2 years, but the process of thinking of an idea for a game could just happen with too much coffee and a Sunday morning with not much else to think about. So
yeah,
I think we have a bunch of ideas. What if you just end up getting people to make your games for you? Do you ever think of expanding Spooky Squid? You were talking about how you didn't want it to turn into a business model. But what if people were like, I would just like to work for you for a year, and I'll just do whatever you want. And like 100 people said that, and then you could just kind of tell them how to make games for you. Would you be interested in taking on that CEO type role, or do you think it would be yucky?
I think like at that point, you need to be a certain level of hands-on to make games that like fit what you want. I'd love to expand a little bit. I think it would be great if we had the money to have a tools programmer and to have like a junior artist working with me. Like 2-3 more people would be great, but we're not hiring. People send me like resumes and I always just feel bad for them. I'm like, can't you tell? We're 2 dudes who are like pretty broke.
Yeah, they can't help but hope though. And for down the line, maybe when you are spilling money out of your ears, you can throw them a bone.
Amazing. I would love to have that superpower, just like money out of ears, just like magic.
Saw a recent episode of Adventure Time where it turns out demons poop bananas out of their ears. I thought that would be yeah, delicious poop for them. This is something that's been on my mind a lot lately, and feel free to just say no comment because it's kind of a weird question. But I keep reading interviews with the likes of like Cliff Bleszinski from Epic Games and Jade Raymond from Ubisoft talking about all these games they wish they could make. And I'm like, what? You just make the game. You're Cliff Bleszinski. You can, out of your own pocket, you can just hire 3 guys and tell them what to do, and it'll be Cliff Bleszinski Games. I made my survival horror game. But they don't do it. They talk a lot about games they wish they could make, but then they're in these huge positions of power, but they don't make those games. It's weird. Is there something to that that I don't know about that you understand, being more of a someone who's knows development from the inside out?
I think there's probably, like, I would guess there's 2 reasons. One, from inside, sort of the belly of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to make things happen. Like, you see some of the people who are like, you know, you'd think would have the power to do whatever the hell they want, but like Hideo Kojima is going to be stuck making Metal Gears forever. You know, he doesn't want to anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really hard to necessarily convince people to let you make the game you want from within a big company.
Mm-hmm.
I think. And then I think if you're someone who's, you know, you're making good money, you probably have a family at this point, that's a big risk to go out and do the indie thing. That's hard. And I think it gets harder the older you get.
Sure. That makes sense.
And the more like a adult your lifestyle is. Like, I'm lucky my lifestyle's not very adult.
Yeah, me too. So you have more power in a way than some of the bigger names in the industry, because they're kind of chained, the golden noose, I think they call it. They're chained to the big publishers who really call the shots. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Uh-oh, what? The computer is dying. This keeps happening. Hopefully, this doesn't make for a good show when your computer's dying. I might have to end the show soon. I thought I had this fixed. Internet. Sorry, everyone. It's plugged in all right. Yeah, but it says 7% power. I guess the plug stopped working. Technical problems. My life isn't that different from yours. Oh, wait. I think it's plugged in now. I just have to hold this wire like this for the next 23 minutes. I can do that. No problem.
Be slightly out of focus.
Am I out of focus?
Oh, now you're in focus.
Okay, I'm in focus. I look like got a big neck. It looks strong.
Beware, autofocus.
Oh, Sinistar, you rascal. We got another question coming in from Slow Holmes, which is a great name. Do you think survival horror still has a place in the mainstream market? Your games have a horror bent to them, and the Cephalopod certainly, I think that's a survival horror game. Definitely survival. Horror wasn't too intensely scary, but certainly creepy and fun. So yeah, are you into survival horror? And if so, do you think that it can survive in the modern marketplace?
I am. I hope it has a place in the modern marketplace, because I'd like to see big budget survival horror continue to be made.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's like interesting about survival horror is the fact that it's one of the few mainstream game genres that's about being weak rather than being strong.
Sure.
So as sort of that like one area where it's not about a power fantasy, or one of the few areas with mainstream games it isn't about being sort of in a power fantasy. I hope it can continue, but it definitely, you can see a trend with the major survival horrors to move slowly away from like the core of what makes those work, which is unfortunate. And I hope that's a blip, and that we'll sort of start to see some more hardcore survival horror come out.
Yeah, I hope so. I still haven't played the last Silent Hill Downpour, I think it was called, but I'd heard it's kind of half and half between real survival horror and more action focused. Resident Evil 6 just looks like a complete action blowout with a lot of gore, but gore doesn't make for scares.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
Yeah,
I think the Wii Silent Hill that came out was really interesting. Like, you could tell they didn't have a good enough budget for what they wanted to do.
right.
But it's full of interesting ideas. Like, it was one of those games that I played through and went, like, this was not a perfect game, but there was a ton of interesting ideas in it.
Yeah. I'm glad it exists, but I wish it were had a little more time to polish. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Were you going to say something?
No, that's very much my feeling about it also. Was like, I'm glad it happened. I'd like to see like that side of Silent Hill or of survival horror explored more. But it certainly wasn't a perfect game. But it was interesting, which is more than a lot of AAA games are.
I think that's true of like 99% of third-party games on the Wii. They just didn't have enough money for them. Publishers didn't seem to have the faith in them to the point where a lot of them didn't even come out here. I don't know if you ever played Fatal Frame 4 on the Wii. It's written by. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I played the original Fatal Frame and really, really liked it on the PS2. And yeah, it was one of the Wii games I was looking forward to. Like, I feel like that console is really interesting, but unfortunately, while the hardware is interesting, a lot of the games that came out for it didn't. It was sort of a victim of its own success, casual-wise. There were so many casual games that did so well, and those games are so much cheaper to make.
Sure.
That it lost its hardcore audience really early. And despite games like Zack and Wiki and like some of the surgery games.
Trauma Team. Yeah.
Trauma Team, and the one before it is like one of the best co-op games I've ever played.
Oh, yeah, Trauma Center Second Opinion?
Second Opinion or True Blood? I want to say True Blood, but it's not quite that.
Yeah, First Contact. Revelations?
Yeah.
Chronicle.
The second one.
Yeah, that's it.
The second one has absolutely amazing co-op, local co-op gameplay. Like super, super hard, really interesting. But yeah, at that point, like, people weren't really paying attention to the console. And so I think it really suffered from that, like, despite being a really interesting piece of hardware.
Yeah, I agree 100%. The Wii, it's an unpopular opinion, but the Wii has my favorite game library of this generation. A lot of games that aren't to their full potential, but so many interesting ideas that I can't say no to it. I love it a lot. And Fatal Frame 4 is definitely one of those games. I hope you get a chance to play it. It's very much about powerlessness. It's very much about atmosphere and surprises. And it has a funny way of giving you sympathy towards the things that are trying to kill you. It's a very good ghost story in that way, because ghosts, they are usually not jerks. They're just miserable because they're dead and they can't touch nothing. So some of the ghosts are very lovable in the game, and then suddenly they're terrifying. It really plays with your emotions in that way, and with sanity as well. Better than I would say Silent Hill Shattered Memories did. It makes you think maybe you're nuts. Fatal Frame. Yeah, it's my little mini review.
Track it down somehow. I'll have to see if I can track it down somehow.
Yeah, it's tough. You can just come over. How far away is Toronto? You want to come over?
I don't know. Where are you?
I don't know. I probably shouldn't tell people because they'll come rob me. That happened right after PAX a couple years ago. I just got robbed. Sucked. But yeah, I'll tell you later. You can just come over and play it anytime. There's a translation patch for it that also enables you to play the Japanese disc on American Wii, as long as you have the original Japanese disc, which I imported. So yeah, we can play anytime. It'll be fun. This show's going really well. Thanks so much. We're almost done, though. We only have 17 minutes left before the end of the show.
Oh are we gonna get like a countdown near the end, like 10?
No, I just have to not suck and keep track of time, which is hard for me. Which while I'm holding this wire. Rinse, Wash, Repeat asked another question. What are you looking forward to at E3, Miguel? Is there anything in particular you're hoping for?
I haven't honestly been paying attention to what's coming out. Like, between comics versus games and trying to finish off They Bleed Pixels, I keep on falling behind on news.
Sure.
I actually don't know what the rumors are of, like, what things are going to be announced at E3 this year.
I can fill you in on a few of them if you're interested. There's going to be a... Say that again?
What do you think I'd be excited by?
Nothing. You're not going to care. No. You'll probably be interested in Hell Yeah. Well, I don't know if you saw that at PAX East. That's
Oh yeah, it's like a Sega game, right?
It's Arkido. Arkido developed it. Sega's publishing it. It is a game made out of frustration with dealing with a mainstream developer and publisher. So it is, it's filled with like comedic anger, like a very healthy expression of anger that's knowingly ridiculous. It's about a skeleton rabbit who has to murder cute little Pokemon type things in a completely surreal 2D world. It's all hand-drawn artwork. Not so much frame by frame, a lot of kind of the flash cheat where it's like cutouts. Looks really nice though, and it's got a Metroidvania gameplay to it. So you'll like that, I think. Yeah, that'll be good.
I'll have a look at that. Yeah, no, I'm honestly out of the loop a lot of the time when it comes to the big games. There's like a few people who I pay attention to. I pay attention to Double Fine.
Mhm.
I'm a big Metal Gear fan, so I pay attention to Metal Gear. And other than that, I mainly pay attention to other indie games because, you know, you sort of need to pay attention to the stuff your friends are doing.
Sure, sure, sure. And that's more your. I mean, if I were you, I would look at the new Modern Warfare and think that's the thinking that went behind that. The process behind it is just it might as well be on a different planet than what you're doing in terms of.
Yeah, it's like I cannot make a game that costs that much money. So
Right.
sort of what I'm looking for often is small games that pack a lot of ideas within a small playtime because I don't have a lot of time, and things I can play local multiplayer with my friends.
Yeah, I'm with you on that 100%. I wonder if The Witness will be at E3. I hope so. Jonathan Blow might kind of hate me, so I know I'm always too shy to ask him to like tell me what he's up to because he got mad at me a few years ago. He gets mad at a lot of people though. It's probably not that big of a deal, but I'm self-conscious about it. Ouch, ouch! My hand is killing me from holding this wire.
You're
How's my
having to
face
hold it in
pain?
place. You're having to hold it in place this entire time. Ouch.
Uh-huh.
That's
Feels
like my
pretty
MP3
bad.
player. I've got to do that with the headphones. It's a pain in the ass.
I guess people want to know what I'm looking forward to at E3. That's awfully nice. I am interested in what the new Castlevania game is going to be. There's a rumor that there'll be a new Castlevania game for the 3DS that is not produced by Igarashi, although that'll be a first. And also a new Castlevania game for consoles, which is kind of surprising because the last one didn't do all that well. I'm not too optimistic about that. There's going to be a new Star Wars game. Maybe that won't suck. Hope
It's been a
so.
while since that's been the case, hasn't it? Like a Star
Yeah,
Wars.
even Force Unleashed was a mixed bag for me. It just felt too much like pandering to people that want Star Wars to be more mean-spirited than it really was initially. There's a lot of people that want Star Wars to have grown up along with them instead of them finding new interests, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, Scarface or whatever. They want Star Wars to be more like Scarface, and that's just
Beware, the Force is with them.
I have a really unpopular opinion in terms of
I'd
Star
love to
Wars.
hear it. I just hurt my stomach bad from laughing at SimStar, but tell me your opinion while I
I consider all of Star Wars to be a huge cutscene for Dark Forces 2, Jedi Knight 1, because I love that game.
That is a great game.
All of it is everything. All the movies, all of that. It's just a really big cutscene they produced so they could make that game.
Well, that's nice to know what you like, and I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. It's that's a very special era in Star Wars evolution, if you ask me, because it hadn't gotten to the point where they were really trying to rebel against the movies yet. There was still a healthy tribute to the movies. You didn't have the prequels yet, I don't think, so you didn't have that to kind of overshadow things. It was just a really nice expansion of the original ideas. It was a good game. We are in agreement. Feels good.
Yes.
This is a tough one. From Rage DMX 47. Whoa, is that the real DMX? DMX is 47, I think. That'd be amazing if DMX would watch my dumb show. Where do you get your ideas from? He wants to know. From you, Miguel. Where do you think your ideas come from?
I think it's from, like, for me, it's reading a lot of books. I read a lot of nonfiction books when I have time, because if I read fiction, I don't get any work done. So, like, I mentioned the Ghost Map, but I'll read a lot of sort of history of science books, stuff like that. I find will hook me in. And then reading non-gaming blogs. Boing Boing has been a really good source of inspiration for me, I found. That's where the idea for guerrilla gardening came, was from a post on Boing Boing. I made a game earlier in the year called Russian Subway Dogs that was inspired by the actual subway dogs in Russia that travel from place to place on the subway, like they're wild dogs.
What?
Second?
No, you can't move on. You can't just say that and then be like, yeah, you made a game about Russian subway dogs?
Yeah.
What happens in the game? What?
You're playing a dog, and basically, like, there's a subway behind you. It was a jam game, so I made it. It's the game I made in about 2 days, roughly,
Okay.
over the year. So you're a dog trying to scare food out of pedestrians wandering around. So like Russians come out of the subway, they wander back and forth. Some of them are drinking vodka, some of them are eating, I think, shawarmas, because apparently that's like the street meat in Moscow. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe someone watching can inform us, but I've heard it's shawarma. So like they're eating it, and you basically try to bark behind them to surprise them, and then they'll like throw either the vodka or the shawarma into the air, and you try to catch it in the air then before other wild dogs get to it. And the vodka, of course, explodes because it's highly volatile. So you're sort of dodging explosions and maybe aiming the explosions at other dogs so that they can't get at your tasty shawarma. It's sort of a score attack game. You're looking at me like I'm crazy again.
No, it sounds so good. These are the kinds of games that nobody tells me these games exist. I'd be so much more excited for E3 if I heard Activision was making the new Russian subway dogs eat the shawarma, avoid the exploding vodka game. That would be so much more compelling to me, because that puts you in a place that you've really never been before. It sounds like you're consistently finding about interesting experiences that other people are having and trying to translate those experiences into games so people can take them on firsthand. What a nice thing you're doing for the world. Where can I play your Russian Subway Dogs game?
You can play the current version of it. I haven't put it up on the website yet, like the Spooky Squid website, but if you go to RussianSubwayDogs.com, it'll take you to the glorious Trainwreck site for the game. So you can get to it from there. We are thinking of putting it out as an iOS game later on in the year once they believe Pixels is done, and I've got some time to add some other features to it, because I want Russian subway bears and such in it, because I think that's an important part of the Russian experience. Oh, it's asking if I'm still here. Yes, I'm still here.
Oh, you're still here, yeah.
Yeah, Google Plus just suddenly asked me, are you still here?
Oh, yeah. It does that after like an hour or so. It expects you to be chatting and stuff like that, I think. So you're doing good.
So yeah, I'm thinking we might expand it and make an iOS game out of it down the road. There's a comic artist we might work with who'll do some like cool spot illustrations for it and such. So that's another game down the road, but a smaller game.
Do you think it's
but
better
for the moment
to...
you can play.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah, at the moment you can play it at
For the moment you can play
RussianSubwayDogs.com.
the current one if you just RussianSubwayDogs.com.
I will be going there as soon as we're done talking. I look forward to it. I'll also be sending it to all my friends. That's the kind of game that I imagine could win over people who don't normally like video games, because almost everyone likes dogs, and so many people I know want to experience something real from another culture. I think that's why Assassin's Creed tends to, people tend to think of it as being a little bit more sophisticated than other games, because it's got a period piece appeal to it and a realism that takes you to something that actually happened at one point or another. Except you're stabbing dudes. That's where they lose me. I don't want to stab dudes, so I don't play those games.
I think Russian Subway Dogs is about as Russian as a Canadian game that had igloos and Mounties in it. So I don't know how much it reflects the actual Russian experience.
Sure, but it at least attempts. I mean, it's based on real ideas, or stuff from real life.
It's a real life thing that's happening, and I was like, this would make an interesting game. It came actually out of a tweet. Brandon Boyer, who runs the IGF, was tweeting articles about these Russian subway dogs, and I read them. I'm like, holy shit, this should be a game. This will be my next jam game. And then I made it. I'm like, oh, this is actually a fun game. I should make this an actual game that's like got some polish to it. And like one of the things I want to add is Russia has these amazing subway stations that are like ornate, beautiful pieces of architecture. So I didn't manage to get that into the jam game, but I'd love to have like a few different levels which look like the different actual stations in Russia, with all this beautiful sort of mural artwork and such.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, sign me up. Oh no, my plug's not working. Yeah, I'm gonna play that game immediately, and let me know if you need some sort of support. People are asking questions, but we have 6 minutes left. I'm gonna try to do it all. I'm adjusting my plug. I'm gonna ask the question.
Really fast.
Yeah, I'll talk really. People love that. People, no, they don't. How about Chinese yin yang cats on the bus for the second game? Asks the gamer me. Is there something? Is there something to that question I don't understand, or is that just a weird question?
It's a weird question. I do have some ideas for like possible like DLC for Russian subway dogs. I'd like to do Laika, the the first dog in space and maybe do it like on a low gravity setting. I've looked up a whole bunch of like dogs through history that could be used as like downloadable content with like different game physics and such.
Awesome.
So I'm thinking along those lines.
What was the name? Do you remember the name of the dog who waited for his master, played by Richard Gere in the American movie in Japan? And he waited. Yeah, you can put him in the game.
Statue at Shibuya Station. Yeah, that's one
right.
that's on my list. And that would have to have like Sentai, like crazy Power Rangers and like ninjas and such added in because
that sounds fantastic.
That's how I roll.
Yeah. So there's two questions I have. We'll probably end up. We have 5 minutes left, so these might be the last questions. One, what do you think of boss fights in general? Because I've noticed there hasn't been a ton of boss fights in your games as of yet. And I don't think you're planning them for Beyblade Pixels as of yet.
Boss fights are a really big problem for indie game developers because in terms of amount of gameplay you get for the amount of time to do a good boss fight, you really need to custom code a whole bunch of stuff. Mm-hmm. And if that's only going to show up for a brief period of time, if you've spent a month just making this one bit of gameplay that's only going to be experienced for 15 minutes, it's a rough time to like amount of play equation. Right. So like I find boss fights interesting. I find boss situations more interesting. Like I think what the best Metal Gear games do with boss fights is fantastic, where they'll sometimes be like, it's not so much a boss fight as an interesting situation for you to be put in. And we've tried to do that a bit with Beyblade Pixels. At the end of each level, I'll usually either introduce a new enemy or try to come up with an interesting challenge that sort of ramps up the intensity of the experience and maybe add something new that the players haven't experienced yet.
Awesome. So it sounds like you're using the limited resources you have instead of spending them on some kind of flashy, more show than substance, traditional boss experience here. Instead, just trying to change up and add as much variety to the situations as you can. So
yeah, find what's important about a boss and find a way to do it within the sort of limited resources that all indie game developers are working in.
That makes perfect sense. Super Meat Boy, my understanding from Edmund McMillan is that the boss fights are the part of the game he's least happy with. He felt like he needed to do them, but in the end, he didn't have the time or resources to make them quite as interesting or quite as smart as the rest of the game.
They're time consuming. Like there's no way to make them good and not time consuming.
Right.
As a developer.
Yeah. Well, regardless of bullet points like boss fights, I'm excited about your stuff. And the other question I was going to ask, let's see if I can remember it because I'm distracted by my cord. Well, when you have all these ideas, what causes one of them to reach the top of your priority list over the others? Like, do you think it's more important to make games that kind of hit people hard emotionally, or do you want to make people laugh, or do you want to just to blow their minds? Is there anything in particular that will cause an idea to reach the top of your list of things you're going to do over the others?
It depends. Sometimes it's like, this is the idea that fits what I need to do right now. So like with Russian Subway Dogs, I was like, I'm doing a jam game. I've got 2 days. What in my sort of pool of ideas am I most excited about that is a small game? In the case of bigger games, ones that I'm working on with Andrew, we'll discuss it together and try to find something that we're both excited by. Often, like with almost all of them, I go sort of like, what can I learn from this? Because I feel like I got into actually designing games rather than just doing art for them in my 30s. And that, I feel, puts me sort of behind the curve. So I'm like, I've got to learn as much as possible, as fast as possible. Because there's a bunch of talented young people behind me who will stab me at the back and kill and eat me.
Sure.
Metaphorically.
Right.
So like with Beyblade Pixels, it was like, okay, I want to learn more about game feel because I'm really interested in that sort of kinesthetic experience. I want to learn about level design because none of the games so far we've done involve level design. I want to tell a story without using words because we used a lot of words in Night of the Cephalopods and it's done entirely silently. And Beyblade Pixels. So I sort of go like, what am I going to learn the most from? What will be the biggest, most interesting challenge?
Interesting. I have this big theory that there's four major kinds of communication that people both give out and receive. It's art, competition, education, and pornography. And yeah, and pornography can be anything from sexual pornography to just watching someone eat all this food and be like, oh, I love food. It's anything that just speaks to kind of your intrinsic instincts. And it sounds like you teach yourself about design while you make it, but in the process of your own education, the output is a piece of art for other people to enjoy. So you're kind of two for the price of one on that. That's pretty awesome. And maybe your games will be teaching people about design as well. They'll be simultaneous.
Yeah, no, we want to make amazing games while we're trying to learn stuff. So it's like we have a very hard time putting something out that we're not happy with. So like that's one of the reasons Vaguely Pixels is ending up being a year late, is that we weren't happy with it yet. It didn't have enough content. It didn't explore what we wanted to explore enough, and it wasn't polished enough. So we still end up with stuff that's good even if we're learning. We just take a while.
Well, take all the time you want, but unfortunately we're out of time for the show. Thank you so much, Miguel. That was awesome. Great job on the show. Was it?
It was fun. I had a good time.
Thank God. Jeez, I was worried people are going to just think I'm a total jerk, dick jerk, and be like, oh, God, I'm stuck with this guy for an hour and a half. But yeah, thank you for being on the show.
No, super fun. I'd be up for doing it again sometime down the road when there's another game to talk about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Consider yourself booked.
Excellent.
Oh yeah, bye. Conrad's coming.
Yeah.
Well, first Holmes was born, then he got fat, bald, and tired. Stop, Holmes.